Then the third thing we're working on is ownership, taking responsibility. I'm not blaming anyone. And what's interesting is the alternative to ownership is either blame or shame. Blame says it's all your fault or somebody else's fault. It's not my fault. And shame says it's all my fault. I'm a piece of trash. Well, what we know is if I'm in blame or shame, I can't be in ownership. It's interesting. A lot of wives intuitively know that when their husbands are in shame, it's not helpful. They may not know why it's not helpful, but they recognize that was because they intuitively know if I just am in my shame, I'm not taking my responsibility. I'm not owning what I've done. And if I don't own it, I can't change it.
Welcome to the Faithful and True podcast. On today's program, again, we would like to feature an episode of the Betrayal Healing Conference with Tammy Gustafson, and her special guest, again, will be Dr. Greg Miller from the staff here at Faithful and True. On today's program, they're going to be discussing the importance of ownership of recovery. Greg will be here to describe that in great detail. We hope that this program and this podcast will be of great interest to you. Here now is Dr. Greg Miller and Tammy Gustafson.
So let's launch in. And why don't you start by helping everybody understand and get on the same page about what is required for change. It is possible for him to change no matter how many years he has been doing this. I hear this a lot. Well, he's been doing it for 40 years, so I don't know if it's possible for him to change, or I don't know if it's possible for him to feel emotions. I don't know if it's possible for him to have empathy. And I believe it is possible for all those things.
Right.
But what, because it's mainly betrayed partners who are watching this, they'll definitely be partners as well. But what do they need to look for? What do they need to require? Where do they raise the bar to in this path of recovery so that they can see that their partner is on a good path? Does that make sense?
Yeah. And so I want to talk about 4 things that I believe are foundational to emotional and spiritual health. These are universal. And I think in this particular context, they give a framework through which a partner can kind of observe what's going on. I often say, a wife or a partner doesn't want to be told that we're different. They don't want us to demonstrate that we're different. They need to experience that we are different. And the partner can trust that intuition that something is shifting here. But I think there are 4 things. The first thing is self-awareness. That if we are not self-aware, we are a danger to ourselves and others. We're the proverbial bull in the china shop. And so we're not aware of the choices that we're making. We're not aware of the intensity of our reactions. And so without self-awareness, we really are hurtful to other people. The second thing we're working on is transparency. So as I become self-aware, I'm sharing that and I'm including whatever is going on with me with my partner. I've heard my wife say, I've heard Deb Laaser say that the sexual betrayal is incredibly painful. And just as painful, or maybe more painful, was the dishonesty, the hiding and the lying. And so we're working on being transparent. We're working on speaking the language of honesty and authenticity and transparency. And in that, we can begin to allow others to know us more fully. Then the third thing we're working on is ownership, taking responsibility. I'm not blaming anyone. And what's interesting is the alternative to ownership is either blame or shame. Blame says it's all your fault or somebody else's fault. It's not my fault. And shame says it's all my fault. I'm a piece of trash. Well, what we know is if I'm in blame or shame, I can't be in ownership. It's interesting. A lot of wives intuitively know that when their husbands are in shame, it's not helpful. They may not know why it's not helpful, but they recognize that was because they intuitively know if I just am in my shame, I'm not taking my responsibility. I'm not owning what I've done. And if I don't own it, I can't change it. And then the fourth thing that we're all working on that is helpful is a sense of purposefulness. It is intentionality. I'm living a very intentional life. Recovery doesn't just happen haphazardly. It's not just some sort of thing that we stumble into. We have to be very intentional in our choices that lead us towards freedom. And so part of what we're looking for in someone is, are you choosing to live the life that you desire? I'm not just talking about things I'd like to do, but I'm actually moving towards them in an intentional way. I think for a lot of wives and partners, part of their frustration is it feels like they have more energy for their recovery than their husbands do. They're the ones asking, what's going on in your group? Or are you going to group? Or have you called your therapist? And, they're working harder than their partner is, and that's never going to be successful. We talk about, I am the leader of my own recovery team. Nobody else can lead it for me. My therapist can't lead it. My spouse can't lead it. My small group leader can't lead it. I have to lead it. And so when a spouse has confidence in a husband's intentionality, that's when they begin to experience some hope. So it's more of these four things. Do I see that my husband is becoming more self-aware? Is he more present with himself? Is he more present with me? Do I see that he's more transparent? He's bringing things to me. I'm not having to ask. I'm not having to find them on my own. But he's just sharing with me. Am I also seeing that he's taking responsibility for his life, not just in the sexual arena, but holistically? If he promises me that he's going to do this thing and he doesn't, he comes back and owns it, Or if he says he's going to do something, he does it. And then the final thing is this intentionality. So those, I think, are the four things that help us to see if someone is really in a authentic recovery versus just performing recovery.
Those are very helpful. Those are very good. So, Greg, what if a woman doesn't see these happening? She's going like, yeah, heck yeah, I want all those. I wish my partner was doing all those. He's not. And okay, he's supposed to be the leader of his recovery team. Well, there is no leader. He's not doing it.
Right.
And there is, I'm not seeing self-awareness, or there isn't transparency or whatnot for that woman who is so longing for all of those things. What does she do?
Right. Well, I think the reality is we have to surrender to whatever is true. And we may want it to be different. We may try to force it to be different. We may even try to manipulate it to be different. But I think the first thing is we just surrender to whatever is true. I often say to the men, whatever is true is true. We can deny it. We can minimize it. We can rationalize it. We can justify it. We can't change it. And so we just surrender to what is true. I think another healthy response is, and we grieve the loss. Many times our attempt to control somebody else is an attempt to avoid our own grief. And so we have to be willing to grieve. This is not what I desired. This is not what I had hoped for. I think the other thing that is very important, and women and partners make choices that help to create and contribute to their own safety. I think one of the mistakes that we make is believing that somebody else can do something that creates safety for me. One of the images I use is when we are children, it's like the adults in our life are responsible for this safety account. And they make choices when we're children that either make deposits or withdrawals to the account. So when we become a young adult, we inherit that account. And some people inherit an account that has a positive balance. Some people inherit a safety account that has a zero balance. And some people, because of the choices adults made in their life, they inherit an account that has a negative balance. Well, the reality is when I become an adult, I now am responsible for my safety account. And what's true is if there's somebody in my life that consistently makes deposits in my safety account and rarely makes a withdrawal, it makes perfect sense I give them access to my account. But if there's someone that consistently makes withdrawals and very few deposits, it makes sense I limit their access to my account. So if I'm in a relationship with someone who's consistently making withdrawals, they're not being authentic, they're not being transparent, they're not being intentional, they're not taking responsibility, they're not very self-aware, then I'm going to limit access to the account. I can still be in relationship with them, but their access is going to be limited. But I'm responsible for that. One of the mistakes I think people make is if my spouse could just do this, I would be safe, versus their choices contribute to my safety and I am responsible for my safety.
I think that's a really important shift that I know in my experience. It took me years to figure that out. So if you're not on board with that yet, or that's okay. But I think this is so crucial. And this becomes that healing relationship with yourself and you having ownership and being able to take power back in your life. So this is beautiful. Greg, what would you...
One thing I also want to say about this is the great irony is the more unsafe we were as children, the more important safety becomes, and yet the more confused we are about what safety is.
Yes.
And so it's almost as if we are now as adults having to learn what is my legitimate safety, what contributes to it, what makes it possible. How do I stay grounded in my truth when I'm in a very chaotic environment? Truth is what creates safety. And what's also true is if I'm dependent upon my circumstances to create safety, then rarely will I feel safe. What creates safety is when I stay grounded in my truth, no matter what my circumstances may be.
So I'd love for you to speak more about that because that's so true. Like it's like, okay, well, what do I do? What does safety look like? And you touched on some of that. But then for betrayed partners who feel like now their world has been shattered, the person that they thought was the safest is now hurt them the most, right? And the whole world feels unsafe, especially in the beginning. I mean, it's just a total. So obviously, this is going to take some time. So obviously, everybody needs to be really gentle with themselves, and this is a long process of kind of reclaiming this. But what can betrayed partners do? What does safety look like? If you can tell us more, and what are some actions that they can do to start to make deposits into their own account?
One of the things that I think is foundational to a sense of safety is living in the reality of healthy detachment. One of the, I'm in my own journey of recovery. I also had a sexual addiction that I'm recovering from, and I also have a work addiction. I have various addictions. And one of the things that I believed was that my value, my identity, and my safety was going to come from something outside of me. It was going to come from the work that I did. It was going to come from some sort of relationship or experience. In fact, probably the biggest thing is I looked towards my wife to give me value, identity, and safety. And so when there was just a disconnection, when we were distant from each other, then suddenly my world just collapsed because I needed that relationship to rescue me from me. And so one of the things that we're working on is a healthy sense of self, that healthy detachment, that my value, my identity, and my safety don't come from somebody else or somebody else's reaction to me. So it's very disorienting. And even in the betrayal, I can still be safe because my value, identity, and safety are not coming from my spouse. They have to come from something beyond me. One of the things I heard my wife say, and she even said it to me, early in our recovery, we were sitting in the car and she said, "I have lost everything because of what you've done." And in that moment, she believed it. But the reality is, in time, she began to see that there were things that she did not lose even because of my choices. And I think that's that truth that helps us to begin to create safety. Not everything was lost. Lots of things have been disoriented. Lots of chaos has been created. But if I can get clearer about what are the things that have not been lost, then I can begin to create that safety again. I think another huge piece is safe people create safety. One of the things that happens is we can have this belief that I'm only safe when I'm isolated. I'm only safe when I'm alone. But the reality is I'm most safe when I'm in safe community. And I know that that's a huge part of recovery. That's a huge part of healing. And so finding those safe people, and we're not always going to do it perfectly. I've heard a lot of people, both the person struggling with the addiction, the man, and also the partner or the wife say, oh, I didn't trust the right people at the beginning. We're all going to make mistakes, but we're also going to find those people that are trustworthy, that are safe. So I think as we work on healthy detachment, as we begin to recognize what we still have that wasn't lost, as we find safe people, those are some of the ways that we start to recreate our safety account. One thing I also would say, and my wife has said this, is when we are betrayed, there is this huge withdrawal made from our safety account. And there's no way one act or one experience is going to put all of that back in. Nowadays, banks have limits about how much you can deposit in a particular day. Well, rebuilding trust is very much like that. Many men just want that one thing that they can rebuild all the trust again and they can be safe again. But it just doesn't work that way. It's going to be over time, consistent deposits that begin to build back the account.
Absolutely. So one thing I hear in my mind as we're talking about this, and I love it, I love what we're talking about, but sometimes men will weaponize this of going, see, it's not up to me. You need to be safe yourself. You need to heal yourself. You can't be looking to me. So I just, for women who have heard that, or for men who have said that, like, that's not what we're talking about.
Absolutely.
So men do not weaponize this.
Yeah, well, what they've done is they've weaponized blame. There's a subtle message of blame of if you just did it right, if you just took care of yourself, if you just would heal, then I would be okay. Well, there's no responsibility or ownership in that. So the reality is that whether we're talking about the person struggling with the addiction or the spouses that's been betrayed, that each can take responsibility for themselves, even in the midst of the destruction. One of the things that I think does offer hope to women is their healing isn't dependent upon their husband's choices. There's a lot of women whose husbands never took responsibility for their choices. They never really owned their own addiction. They continued to blame, or they stayed in shame. And what we know is they will never heal if they don't take responsibility for themselves. But the good news is for the wife, for the partner, healing is still possible for them, even if the husband never chooses it for himself.
Yes. And ladies or betrayed partners who are listening, if you were really early on in this process, this is not going to make a lot of sense right now because of your felt experience. And so I want to acknowledge that if you were just found out, if you're in the midst of discovery or disclosure or all that, or early on and all this chaos, just pack this way in the back of your mind and come back to it later. For those who are a little bit farther along in the journey, for those who are moving out of crisis mode, getting your feet back underneath you, or been in this for a long time, then this is probably going to make a lot more sense. And this is your pathway to your freedom. So I just want to highlight that. And I want to come back to that safety piece, because for me, for so long, that was so confusing to me, or it didn't even seem like it was a possibility. And I found for me, what tipped the scales and started to help me was when I finally was able to calm my nervous system down. That was the first time, because my nervous system was on fire for about 6 years. And so if your nervous system is on fire, you're in good company. But it was when that nervous system finally started to get calm, that was the first time I was really able to understand and experience that I can have safety in my body, not just in my mind, but in my mind and in my body. And I can start, that also helped me lean into what you were talking about, the community more. And being like, there can be a lot of unsafe and scary stuff out there, but if you have a couple people or a group of people that you can come back to who know you and who have your back, that's going to give you that foundation to kind of start to move forward. Yeah. And for the nervous system, I would love to hear if you have any thoughts on that. For me, it was fascia work and Reiki. those two things, there were a lot of things I tried. Those were the things that actually calmed my nervous system best for me. Everybody has to figure out what works best for them.
Well, one of the things that we talk about is fear and anxiety are like warning lights on the dashboard that are telling us that we don't perceive that we are safe. And that perception word is very important because sometimes we perceive we are safe and we're actually unsafe. And sometimes we perceive that we're unsafe and we're actually safe. But when we are in our anxiety, when we are in fear, it is about a lack of safety. There's this sense of a perceived threat. And so the more that we can be self-aware that, okay, something is going on where I don't see myself as safe. Maybe I believe that there's a threat, or maybe I'm not sure what all is going on. That acknowledgement is the first step. And then allowing ourselves to really get grounded in some sort of truth. You mentioned what helps our bodies to relax, what helps us to kind of slow down. Well, one of the things that's been helpful for me is somatic therapy. And one of the things my therapist and I work on is getting present in my body and allowing my body to let me know what's going on. Is my heart racing? Is my breathing rapid? Well, if that's the case, it's because there's something going on. My body is responding and I'm getting ready to either fight or flee because I perceive a threat, even if there's no threat in the moment. I think another thing that complicates this, I go back to that safety account. So if I'm a little boy or I'm a little girl and I didn't grow up in a very safe environment and I inherited this account that has a negative balance, then many times what's happening in the present is actually connecting me to the past. And so the lack of safety isn't just about current experiences, it's about past experiences. And so part of my work is to separate those two and allow myself to be reminded that I am safe. Sometimes I need to even speak words to the younger version of me that I am safe and that as an adult, I can take care of myself. But the more I can get present in the present, the more that I can address whatever was unsafe in the past, then the more accessible safety is in the present. You know, one of the things that's interesting is we have these big themes, like betrayal is a big theme. And so what we know is if I'm betrayed in the present, it connects me to all of the betrayal I've experienced in my life. So the betrayal that I experienced as a little girl, as an adolescent, as a young woman, as now, it all gets connected. That's where the intensity comes from. If I was hurt, all of the hurt can get connected. And so we do need some help to start to get present in the present. Part of what we do is by acknowledging the past.
And that is not because a lot of times betrayed partners will have this thrown in their face of like, well, it's not really this. It's because of your childhood trauma that you haven't dealt with. And that's not what we're talking about. That is, again, something being weaponized and somebody hurting you. But there is reality to that. Like I say a lot, it's like every insecurity you ever have suddenly comes back and it's like on steroids. It just like floods. And so it's really, again, this kind of longer term version, or not version, but pathway of healing for betrayed partners that brings so much hope is that this does offer that opportunity to go back and heal those things. It does not diminish what happened in the present, but it gives that opportunity for that.
Right.
So,
you know, one thing I just want to say, and it's based upon, you know, the comments that you've made. Foundationally, if a husband is not owning his addiction, his choices, the consequences of those, that is going to be a red flag to a wife. This, you know, the comments that you made, they're about blame. Anytime I am blaming somebody else for my addiction, I cannot heal. Because I cannot heal something that I do not own. I cannot heal something I'm taking responsibility for. And I will say this takes time for the person struggling with addiction or compulsive behavior. You know, we don't just awaken one day to that ownership piece. So what maybe we're looking for is a trajectory of ownership, a pattern of ownership. You know, maybe what's true is one day in my shame, I blame my spouse. We often say where there's blame, there's shame, and where there's shame, there's blame. The pendulum swings back and forth. So maybe my shame gets triggered and I have that moment of blaming my spouse. Well, maybe it's just a moment and it sets me back, but I can see it in a context. The trajectory is towards ownership. But for that husband, that partner that's consistently blaming his circumstances, his parents, his background, his spouse, whatever, there is this intuitive knowing of, wow, nothing's going to change significantly if it doesn't start with ownership. Ownership creates safety in relationships.
Mm-hmm. So, Greg, as we start to transition and wrap up, I want to take a step back because when we talk about this stuff, it's in the weeds and it's heavy and it's scary and all that, but there's also tremendous hope, right? There is tremendous ability to change. Individually, there is a tremendous ability for the relationship to grow and heal it and become something better. Now, obviously, that's not going to happen in every scenario, and that's on him. Everybody, he has to do that work to heal this. But can you speak to the hope and to the ability and possibility to change?
Absolutely. Ironically, I want to start with why we don't change. And the reason why we don't change, the reason why we're resistant to change is because we intuitively know to heal, we have to experience pain. That pain must be exposed in order for it to be healed. And the whole concept of coping strategies and addiction is to avoid pain. The reason I would act out sexually is there was some pain, there was some hurt that I didn't want to experience, so I was medicating it with my acting out. So I often say recovery sucks. And the reason that recovery sucks is it's an invitation to move towards the pain you've been wanting to avoid. But the deal is recovery sucks, but addiction sucks more. We have to be willing to feel the pain that we've been avoiding. That's where the hope is found. The hope is found in that pain that is expressed, pain that is felt, then can be healed. So we are resisted. And what's also true is we live in a culture that values comfort more than transformation. You know, we create a life of being comfortable. We want those things that bring us comfort. But transformation doesn't occur when we're comfortable. Transformation occurs when we are in pain, when we are exposed. We often say that pain is the invitation, it's the on-ramp to the transformational journey. So it's about what I do, how I steward the pain, and it's the courage. You know, we were talking before about the importance of safety, and I believe this idea is I have to be safe enough that I'm willing to be risking enough, that I can be transformed enough, that I'm willing to try it again. But without courage, there's not transformation. Without courage, there's not hope. And so as I'm willing to experience it, it's the belief that pain expressed can be healed. Pain felt can be healed. That's where we find our hope. I don't have to live the rest of my life in pain. I don't have to live the rest of my life medicating pain. I find those things that bring hope and healing.
I love it. I love it.
One thing I would say, if you're
Yes.
in an environment where you're not experiencing hope, I would encourage you to evaluate that environment. There's always hope, because there's always healing when we are dealing with, no matter how intense the pain is, there is the promise of healing. And so if you are in an environment you're going, or a relationship, I don't feel a lot of hope, give yourself permission to slow down and maybe explore that and evaluate that.
Thank you for joining us today on the Faithful and True podcast. We hope that today's program has been enlightening and helpful to you. We hope that you'll visit our website whenever you can find the time, faithfulandtrue.com, where you'll find lots of resources available to you, as well as information and online registration for attending any of our 3-day intensives. In the meantime, we hope that this coming week will be a week for you that's filled with many blessings and great vision.